Neurodiversity describes the way in which all of us vary in terms of how we think and we feel and we process information. Now, for most of us, the differences between us are relatively small, but for some individuals that we call neurodivergent, there is a significant difference between how they process information compared to most people.
Our dyslexic learners, generally, when they are any age, if they're undiagnosed, will experience incredible levels of frustration, because I think for a neurotypical learner, learning phonics, for example, can be quite straightforward, whereas for a dyslexic student, they are probably quite hard on themselves and not understanding why they're not able to learn in the same way. So I think the classroom can be quite an isolating place. The negative self-talk has such a big impact on our students as well, so it's really important that if you recognise that a child has learning difficulties, you're able to support them and build their self-esteem.
If you think about what we expect children to do from a very early age, we expect them to be able to sit on the carpet, to listen to the story, not touch the person next to them, not shout out. Now, for a child who has ADHD, those things are going to be very difficult. They may be super smart and able to do many, many things, but ask them not to touch the child next to them if the child's annoying them. That's a skill that they're struggling to develop. So it's really shifting away from an idea of good and bad to thinking about the fit between the child and the environment. So a person who says, actually, life is very difficult for me, is saying the world is not accommodated in a way that fits my brain.
It just makes me kind of happy that everyone's not the same, because it's kind of like, oh, I find this easy, oh, I find this easy, I find this hard, I find this hard, and it's nice to know that other people find the same things hard, but it's also nice to know that you can kind of build off each other on the things you find work good and help each other, which is why I like autism.
We know that there's a huge overlap between these neurodivergent conditions. So if your child has one, say they have dyslexia, there is a much higher chance that they will have another type of neurodivergence, such as ADHD. 40 to 50% of young people, if they have one of these types of neurodivergence, they will also have another one. Masking is when individuals mask their true feelings or thoughts about something in order to not stand out from the other people around them. Masking is a coping mechanism, and we now understand that a lot of people with autism and with ADHD spend a lot of time masking at school and in other situations. And what we're finding is that a lot of young people who mask a lot at school, they get home and their emotional and social battery is completely empty, and then the parents are like, wow, what happened? They have a child who really is very dysregulated and is all over the place.
You may be overwhelmed, or you may be in a space where you feel like you don't entirely belong, or you're not fully out there to be all of you, and you kind of put that mask on and you kind of water yourself down and dilute yourself into someone that people can kind of be able to digest.
I think people need to realise that girls have a tendency to hide their autism and mask it to kind of fit in. A lot of the time as well, when a girl has autism, she has anxiety, which is a massive thing, and I think that's why people slip under the radar as well, because when I was younger I was diagnosed with acute anxiety disorder, but really I was autistic.
There are a couple of things that I think you can hold on to. The first one is self-awareness for you and awareness for your child. So really being curious and asking yourself, where is my child struggling? What is maybe the skill that's catching them out? Or where exactly does the difficulty lie? Let's say you have chaos in the morning. Breaking it down and saying, what are all the tasks that my child has to do and in what areas are they struggling? So if we know that they have 10 things that they have to do in the morning, why don't you to begin with say, I'm going to take a couple of those away. So I'm going to pack their bag for them and have it ready at the door. Now, it doesn't mean you're doing it forever, but to begin with, you could start to take away some of those difficulties in order to make life a little easier.
One of the reasons I gotten so much better was because of my mum. Because after the meltdown, I thought, oh God, my mum's going to shout at me now. But she never shouted at me once for it. She always just talked to me and said, Mickey, what are we going to do next time? And that. So it's just like, she really helped me calm down.
The next thing is communicating, and communicating with young people around difficulties is tricky. You never want to do it in the moment. You want to do it at a time when you're feeling regulated and calm, but when they're feeling regulated and calm as well. And you never start that conversation with a telling off or telling them that they're, at your age you should be blah, blah. Often start with something that you can own yourself. And then in that calm space, you'll get their rational brain.
School is the hub of their social interaction with their peer group. And if you don't fit in your peer group, and the school don't seem to make adjustments that are necessary in order to enable you to fit, then you become more and more and more of an outsider. And I think that at an impressionable age, if you stand outside because you've been excluded, you're excluded socially, you're excluded educationally, you begin to feel either, well, I am on my own, so I'm just gonna cope with this, which I suppose maybe 5% of people have the kind of resilience built into their DNA that they just do that. But I think 95% of people start asking themselves questions. Why don't I belong? Why am I outside? What's wrong with me? Why don't I fit in? And all the kind of questions that I think for a young person are the eroders of self-esteem, until the person reaches a point, as Talia did, where they feel that, well, they don't fit in because they can't fit in, and they can't fit in because they're not worth fitting in.
Schools are getting much better at being flexible and adaptable according to children's needs. And as a parent, I think you absolutely can go in and talk to the teacher and ask them what they can do to support a child in a certain way. For example, if we have a child who has slow processing speed or difficulty with handwriting, one small adaptation that a teacher can make is to say, you don't need to take down notes. If you just listen, I'll provide the key ideas to you before the end of the lesson. A visual timetable can be extremely helpful for children, particularly children with social communication difficulties, children who are autistic, so they know exactly what to expect, because it's the uncertainty that can be very stressful for someone with autism. It can be very confusing for adults around neurodivergent young people because they're really good at something, so they may be able to explain in incredible detail their computer game or the game that they really love, or problem solve something that they're very interested in, and yet they can't put their shoes on properly, they can't make it to the door on time, they can't write down what their homework is. I think the best thing we can do is to think of it as a skills deficit, a skills difficulty. And that's what neurodivergence means. It means that you're significantly better at some things than you are at other things. So let's identify what that is. And we have to teach them how to do it. And the way in which we teach them is we do it for them first, then we do it with them alongside them, and then we do this scaffolding approach. You take away a little bit of the scaffolding gradually as they begin to uptake that bit of the task. It can take a long time to do this. It might take 2 years, it might take 5 years, it might take 10. So it requires a lot of patience. We have to see it as a long-term task. So if you're trying to teach your child to check their timetable every time when they come in, just say to yourself, when I'm giving them a bit of toast or whatever it is they have when they come in, I'm going to suggest they check their timetable. If you do that consistently every day for enough time, months, maybe years, by the time they leave you, they will be checking their timetable, and you have to see it as that's what I'm aiming for.
I go through all the scenarios in my head and I always pick the worst one, like getting lost in a secondary school building. I feel like people need to recognise that autism makes you stressed and that it can make it worse, and that if you're fine on the outside doesn't mean you're fine on the inside.
Early intervention when we're thinking about neurodivergence is having the lens to consider the barriers to learning for young people in the early years. What we now know is that there were many young people who were really keeping it together in the early years, in the primary school years. A lot of this masking was going on. They were trying so hard to do what was expected of them. And then when they got to the secondary school years, when their teenage brain came on, things would fall apart, and it would show in their mental health. depression, anxiety, eating problems, self-harm, those kinds of things. So early intervention when we're thinking about neurodivergence is identifying the difficulties, even when they're small difficulties, early on, and supporting children to develop the skills that they don't have.
Any adjustments that I make in the classroom are really done with the neurodivergent learners in mind. However, they benefit all students, and they're certainly not going to take anything away from neurotypical students. And quite often our neurodivergent students will take what they need when they need it. So it might be that one day they actually don't need that writing frame, or they don't need that extra scaffold, whereas a neurotypical student sat next to them might. It really depends. So by making your adaptations available for everybody, it really helps to create that inclusive learning environment.
So as we recognise neurodiversity more generally in the population, I think the institutions need to recognise and honour all the differences that we see in a group of children. If we can use that framework of thinking about each individual child as having strengths and weaknesses and different skills and identify them from the beginning, then we're in a much better position to be able to support every child to learn and grow and find the barriers early on before they really cause a problem. The 3 C's I think is a nice template. Curiosity, so have a lot of curiosity. Tell me a little bit about what you notice. What do you struggle with? In what ways do you think it might help to identify it? Be compassionate, so validate what they're experiencing. That's just incredibly powerful for building your relationship, for enabling communication with the young person. And then be courageous. And the courage is in making the decision about what to do next. You might say, I really hear that you're struggling with that. Let's watch it together. Let's see if there's some few things that we can do to support you. Maybe let's talk to your teacher. Let's make sure that sleep, diet and exercise are in a good place, because we know sleep, diet and exercise has a huge impact on how the brain is functioning. And then let's come back and review it in a few weeks or a few months. And if you're still really struggling, then maybe we can pursue the diagnosis.